In the chat, we need to start recording.
Okay, I'll do that again. Well, welcome everyone to the ACRL-Oregon Lightning Talk and Webinar event. We're so glad that you're here to join us. This is going to be in place of our annual Manuka event. And so we're going to be doing a series of webinar talks and gatherings this summer and into fall. And so thank you for being here today. I am going to pass it off to Amy.
Hi everybody, my name is Amy Stanforth. I work at Portland State University and my pronouns are she, her. I'm going to start by introducing our first Lightning Talk presenter. They are from Pacific University and their topic is called Changing Policies for Changing Times. So the presenters today will be Drew Jackson, he, him, his, who is the Access Services Manager, Sarah Kirkley, she, her, the Electronic Resources Manager, Laura Baird, she, her, from Systems and Applications Librarian, Lynda Irons, she, her, from Research and Instruction Services, and Angela Lee, the Health Sciences Librarian. And their topic is, again, called Changing Policies for Changing Times. And the abstract for their presentation is follows. So policy writing is rarely nimble or innovative, but using change management techniques, Pacific University libraries drafted policies to address the circumstances during this past year. They will discuss how they identified a need to change, which policies they changed, how they identified goals for change, and their methodology for working through those changes. And they'll also share how they adapted their approach to accommodate remote work. So I'll go ahead and let Drew share his screen, and Pacific University, take it away.
Okay, there we go. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Amy, for the introduction. So here it is, Changing Policies for Changing Times. Like Amy said, my name is Drew Jackson. Also presenting with me is Sarah Kirkley.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
We are presenting on behalf of Laura, Lynda, and Angela today. I think if all five of us try to talk, we get, what, 2 minutes each? So here we go. There we go. So a little bit about Pacific to get us started. We are a small private university with about 4,000 students over 4 campuses here in Oregon, those being in Forest Grove, Hillsborough, Woodburn, and Eugene. We have about 120 areas of study, ranging from traditional liberal arts to health professions to education and teaching and so on, including undergraduate and graduate programs. So today we're taking a quick look at some hopefully replicable practices for managing change that worked for us as we revise our privacy policy and our library faculty handbook. These practices are synthesized from bodies of work on change management and project management. So here is an overview of how we structure our strategy for change. In purple, we have a selection of steps from Cotter's 8-step process for leading change. In blue are steps from the incremental software development process, which is a project management strategy that we borrowed from, you guessed it, software development. So the first big step is specification, where we figure out what we actually need to do and then structure how to do it. So first we create a sense of urgency, identifying internal and external needs for change. Then we build a coalition, gathering volunteers with diverse perspectives and create a vision for change, establishing definitions and frameworks to ensure that everyone is on the same page from the jump. Next, we work on the actual development process by removing obstacles and practicing incremental development, breaking the work down into manageable chunks and assigning them out to members of your team. And then we repeat that process as new obstacles arise. Finally, we institute change, bringing those incremental tasks back to the group for synthesis and review, and then bringing the final product to the larger body for review and/or approval. So the first of those steps was to create a sense of urgency. Now, here at Pacific for our privacy policy, that was actually relatively easy. Our previous policy had not been updated since 2008, so more than a decade ago. In 2008, we had not yet migrated to Ex Libris's Alma Primo ILS, and the old policy revealed a much different relationship with data than we have now. The policy stated that no data would be collected by any third party without explicit patron consent or a warrant or court order. Now, in 2020, this certainly isn't true, if it even was true in 2008. And then also, since 2008, conversations around privacy external to the institution have changed too, including the increasing frequency of data breaches, both within the world of libraries and library vendors and externally. Our library faculty handbook was similarly out of date. It had not been updated to reflect changes to the broader university guidelines, and it left a new non-librarian library faculty member in sort of a weird policy gray area. In addition, it was felt that the guidelines for advancement needed to be a little bit clearer, both for new librarians joining the profession and joining the team, and also for non-librarians involved in that review process. So the small size of our library, we have 24 positions here, that helps us be nimble and flexible in creating and implementing change. But the number of staff at the institution isn't the end-all be-all in a building a responsive approach to policy. So in both of these policy revision projects, our coalition of volunteers was drawn from across departments or across levels in the library hierarchy. In the case of the privacy policy, it was actually both. So bringing together staff or paraprofessionals and librarians from different departments helps ensure that a variety of viewpoints will be represented in the final product, while still benefiting from the agility of a smaller working group. Reaching across silos can create a better end product, in addition to just helping to build affinity and those relationships across professional lines. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about creating a vision for change.
Sure. So we had a few goals in mind as we kind of crafted and adapted these new policies. So first of all, we wanted to ensure that their contents were accurate. So things that were reflecting our actual practice, not just what we hoped to do or what the kind of ideal situation would be. And we also, in that kind of realm, wanted to be sure to include references and kind of the intersection of relevant university policies as well as local, state, or federal laws that impacted the subject matter. We also wanted to kind of increase the transparency in these policies. So, you know, sometimes library policy is written in such a way that's really kind of written for other libraries, not necessarily for our users or the people who might be directly impacted. So that was our second kind of goal, was to demystify some of that language. And last was to create some practices that were sustainable in the long term. So we know we can't future-proof, but we can kind of take steps to ensure that doing various future edits or changes would not be quite as daunting as starting from scratch kind of 14 years later, like we did with the privacy policy. Next slide, please. So the next step was to remove obstacles, and that might be a little bit of a lofty goal, but we wanted to remove, address, at least acknowledge a lot of the barriers that came into play. So we did this in a couple of ways. We incorporated some approaches, as well as just, again, addressed and acknowledged kind of some of the realities of our situation. So we would kind of create this time and space for additional research, deeper dives into subject matter based on our kind of delegated based on our areas of expertise within the library or interest, and come back and kind of come to a shared understanding. As Drew mentioned, the groups were made up of varying members across the library, and so they kind of included a diversity of perspectives, but they didn't necessarily include all who might be impacted or have some valuable insight to provide. So we would often, if we had a gap in our knowledge or couldn't work through and kind of come to an agreement on something, go back to the research phase or reach out to additional kind of stakeholders and see if they could provide some clarification. And then lastly, we the timelines kind of for both of these policy revisions were happening as we were reacting and adapting to COVID-19, to completely remote work schedules. And I think these both might have been easy projects to kind of push aside in the face of other work. So we kept our regularly scheduled meetings and kind of kept plugging away on it incrementally, which was helpful in allowing us to maintain at least a little bit of a sense of routine or normalcy. Next slide. So these are some of our deliverables. We kind of approached this as a strategy for completion, for getting something done. So it feels good to have these kind of tangible products at the end. And we're already kind of incorporating some of these incremental approaches and steps for change in project management into our work on the accessibility committee and the equity, diversity, and inclusion committees. Next slide. Okay, and so just to wrap up, we adapted and customized some of these practices from other disciplines. So we hope that that's maybe a little bit inspiring or will empower you all to kind of look outside of library land sometimes for approaches to kind of help projects get done. We are also, you might have noticed that we mentioned we used Cotter's 8 steps, but didn't include all 8 steps. So we definitely customized what worked for us, left what didn't, and encourage you all to kind of do the same. Yeah, and so we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of this session. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Pacific University. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next lightning presenter. And just a reminder, if you have questions anytime during these presentations, go ahead and put them in the chat box. And then at the end of the presentations, we'll go ahead and ask those questions of our presenters. So our next person is Rowena McKernan, she, her, hers, the OER and copyright librarian from Whatcom Community College. And her topic is called Small Scale IR for Community Colleges. And here's the abstract for her presentation. So we've built and deployed an Omeka-S institutional repository and want to share some insights into how to make this possible even for small and rural community colleges. So Rowena, go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
Hi, okay. So hello everyone, my name is Rowena McKernan. I'm the Open Educational Resource Specialist for Whatcom Community College in the upper northwest of Washington State. For comparisons, we have 3,800 FTEs, so if you want to compare apples to apples, that's one way to do it. And my role at the college is primarily to support adoption and adaption of OER. I work with faculty and I coordinate the print production, as well as the digital representation through Open Pressbook Library. Keep that in mind as we go on. So why repository? Let's see, hopefully that updated. So why a repository? That's a really good question. Not every institution has a digital repository. Most of the bigger colleges and universities do, of course. But there's still a lot of smaller places that don't. So we looked at it, so as part of our library's mission to support student and employee scholarship, the director and I explored various ways to represent our existing digital collections, as well as we wanted to begin to showcase the amazing scholarship that was happening at our institution. There's a lot of instructors getting their PhDs and needed some place to put their final output, their product. And as an institution, we also had a growing need to preserve and document some of our institutional history. And we felt this project would live more naturally in the library than it would in the IT department or some other department. Various places were floated around and it was like, no, we'll do it. I had never managed a digital repository before, so I did spend some time exploring various options before we settled on our final solution. And I thought I'd share that process and some thoughts about the usefulness of these other systems in case they may work better for your institution. or for your situation. So of course, any additional project is always challenging. I'd like to acknowledge that we all wear many hats when we work in a community college. We don't have highly specialized roles. We do, like I do instruction, I do this, that, I do a bunch of things. So I wanted to share some of our success in integrating a new project. It's totally possible. And this is very impactful for the college. So it's really raised the library's digital footprint with administration, which is very important come budget crunch time. So I'm going to start with my process to where we got to where we are. We, of course, started, first thing you do is start with a Google spreadsheet. It's the easiest thing to do, very low stakes. Has an easy ability to collect data. You can put out a form, faculty can fill it out, boom, your spreadsheet's populated, and there's ways to visualize that data in the spreadsheet very easily. We used a project called Awesome Table and made some great visualization. Let's see if I can pull it up here. I don't know if you can see me when I change screens, probably not. So that was step one. So if you have a very small collection of materials, a Google form that auto-populates a spreadsheet is perfect. This may be where you want to stay. That didn't quite work for us because we had too much stuff. I mean, you can only go so far with a Google spreadsheet. We decided to try out WordPress. So like I mentioned before, I manage the Open Textbook Library, which is Pressbooks, which is a multi-site WordPress install. So I'm very comfortable using WordPress. I'm very comfortable modifying it, adding functionality to it. So with custom post types, you can really do quite a bit for different types of collections and also for the relationships between collections. For example, if there's a paper that was published with multiple authors from your institution, it's all connected to each author. Each author has its own page with all their research listed on it. It worked really well. There's going to be a small cost with this. This isn't going to be possible with the totally free products. You're going to need to put your WordPress on a server and modify it a little. So it does have a little bit of technical expertise. The WordPress community is very friendly. They're very helpful. And with just the cost of a server, and server costs can be really inexpensive these days. But we came to the conclusion that this also wasn't going to quite work for us. It wasn't quite robust in the type of metadata that was available and the way it interacted with the wider world. We're on the internet. We want to make sure whatever we put out there, especially if it's an archive, that it can be picked up by other entities, maybe like the Digital Public Library of America, for instance. So this worked really well for like a good medium-sized collection of mixed media, but we needed to move on. And so again, we didn't have a ton of money dedicated for this project, so we looked to open source solutions. Actually, honestly, the first thing we do is look for open source solutions for everything. It just makes things better in the long run. And so we looked to Omeka. Omeka is an open source, a repository first software. So it is designed to be your archive. It's not like WordPress where you have to do a lot of work to make it an archive. Omeka already comes, it's already an archive. It does exactly what you would want a traditional archive to do. There is hosted version that we started off with because it has a 90-day free trial. So we're like, okay, sign us up, we'll do it. But Omeka.net has its limitations, and it's great for a single collection, but ultimately we had multiple collections, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So after the 90-day trial, there is a small fee to continue to use it. And like any other hosted solutions, it's very locked down in terms of what kind of functionality or modules or plugins you can add to it, as well as themes. It has very limited theming, but it's hosted. So if you don't have a lot of technical expertise, this actually might be the best solution for you. So moving on to what our needs ended up being, our scope sort of what we wanted to do with a repository, we ended up with sort of 3 big categories of materials. One was, of course, employee scholarship, that's faculty scholarship, and professional level staff, such as student services, library that wasn't faculty, librarians that weren't faculty, and instructional leaders that were also producing scholarship. So we wanted to make sure we could capture that. We had a lot of digital images that we kind of put into a historical images category. It had already been described by a library intern using controlled vocabulary, so it was already, you know, beautifully, you know, laid out with great descriptions and stuff. But of course, a visual image archive functions a little bit different than maybe a scholarship archive that works as more of a list. And then of course, we also wanted to celebrate the scholarship that our students were doing, student newspapers, student journals, ones that were defunct, ones that may be starting up. Our college recently branched out into student research fairs. We had our first one, actually our second one this year, so we wanted to capture all that work we were doing. And so we really ended up having to move toward a more robust piece of software, and that software ended up for us being Omeka S. Omeka S is different from Omeka in that sort of like, it's like a multi-site WordPress. It is a multi-site Omeka. So you can have various sites with different focuses that all feed back into the same backend for management. So the 3 different sort of collections we had, we were able to build them on separate little Omeka sites that all fed into this big multi-site version. So Omeka and Omeka S, initially developed by the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. It's funded by a bunch of different other entities. It is open source. You can build it with them on GitHub. I've already contributed to some of the documentation because, of course, as I was going through it, I was like, these instructions don't make sense to me. And because it's a repository, it has robust metadata uses for it. So you can connect, like it says there, you can read the slide, connects to the semantic web, you can share it with the DPLA. We haven't quite gotten there yet. It does have some modules or plugins, pieces of functionality you can put in. I'll recommend a few of these in a few minutes. And it's a fairly easy piece of software to use. Definitely recommend it. It's responsive. They do try to build it with accessibility first in mind. So that, I mean, I haven't mentioned accessibility yet, but that is core, that's key. Some additional notes, we're using Reclaim Hosting to host our software. There's an organizational account that's $100 a year. We felt that was a good investment since the software was free. Normally I don't plug servers, but you know, I've been pretty amazed by these people. They're great. And of course you need a librarian. That would be, in our case, that would be me. And a director was willing to carve out a little bit of time for me during the school year. So it wasn't just here's an extra thing you have to do. He actually recognized that this is a thing that takes time and commitment, and that, you know, put your money where your mouth is. And that's also really important. So big shout out to my director, Howard. Let's see, how am I doing for time? Got a few more minutes. So I'm gonna just go over a few really useful plugins or modules, they call it in Omeka. CVS import. I've been building all my collections in CVS spreadsheets. This is gonna be useful in the long run for maintaining the metadata. If I need to update it or change it, I can just re-import the spreadsheet and it updates it in a batch. Note, Google actually makes great CVS spreadsheets. When you export your Google spreadsheet, it automatically is encoded in UTF-8. It automatically is like, it just has it the right way. Excel, for some reason, you have to do a little extra bit to it to make it compatible. But again, it's a spreadsheet, so you know how to use the spreadsheet. Metadata browse will add that linking back and forth between subjects. So you can click on a subject link and it takes you to all the other items with the same subject. And file side load is another plugin that I highly recommend. You just upload all your stuff into one folder on your server and put the file name in your spreadsheet, and it'll just pull it up into the individual item. So it's been really fantastic. Those are the top 3 plugins I recommend that you initially use. I forgot to say there is a sandbox on a MecS, so you can actually go to a MecS right now and play around in their sandbox. Very useful. Final note on accessibility, this product, of course, you as the user can introduce things that are not accessible all the time, but the software itself makes a good effort. They have a VPAT, they have a roadmap, they are aware of and making that part of what they're doing. So thank you, everybody. I'll share the slides with everyone who wants them, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. I know this is just sort of a broad overview. This is not a like how to do a Mecha, because it's a lightning talk. So hopefully you guys have lots of questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. Our next lightning presenter is Chelsea Nesvig, she, her, hers, and she is a research and instruction, global and policy studies librarian from the University of Washington, Bothell Cascadia College. And our next presentation is called Research Speed Date, Think, Pair, Share for Online and Hybrid Courses. And here's a little abstract about this presentation. Think, Pair, Share is an activity librarians and instructors regularly use in their teaching while students are present in a classroom. But what happens in an online or hybrid classroom? Students are likely to complete research activities alone without any interaction with their fellow classmates. By pairing students up to interact with each other in person, over the phone, or with a chat app, they are automatically able to talk to and engage with a classmate. Offering these students a way to engage with fellow classmates around their research helps them break down or break out of the silos that online courses so often produce. And the core structure of this activity can be applied to student interaction during different stages of the research process, or even for non-research assignments. All right, Chelsea, go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
Okay, let's share here. I think that's working. Looks good. All right. And oops, okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Nesvig, she, her, hers. I'm Global Policy Studies Librarian at the UW Bothell and Cascadia College Campus Library. And this is my lightning talk, Research Speed Date, Think, Pair, Share in Online and Hybrid Courses. So hashtag what? We will get to that in a moment, but first a little bit of context. As I'm sure many of you are aware, a common activity in face-to-face information literacy classrooms involves an activity that some call Research Speed Date. It's a version of Think, Pair, Share. It's a way to pair students up to discuss their research topic or question of interest. And here's an example from a worksheet I've used in face-to-face classes. The act of speaking aloud about their research interests and getting feedback from a classmate regularly gives students new ideas and new directions to consider. They also benefit from sharing their thoughts and ideas with just one person before they're asked to share them with the whole class. But what about online? In an online or hybrid classroom, due to the way that a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard organizes students into individual silos, they are likely to complete library research activities alone without any interaction from their fellow classmates. This was a regular frustration of mine when I was working with students in online spaces, because I knew how students benefited from working together in face-to-face classrooms, and that online learning can be lonely and isolating when you aren't face-to-face with classmates. So then I saw an opportunity. I was working with an online English 102 course at Cascadia College that required students to use Slack. And for those who aren't familiar with Slack, just briefly, it's a web app-based communication tool. It's part discussion board, part messaging system. And it's actually an acronym that stands for Searchable Log of All Conversations and Knowledge. So the image on the right here is one that the faculty member put together about why she required Slack. And so I was wondering how I could harness this new tool for information literacy instruction in this class. Having used the donut feature with a different group, I'll talk more about that in a second, I realized that it could work as a way to pair students up for a research speed date like interaction. And Slack uses hashtags for its channels or its groups, hence naming this all hashtag research speed date. So first I needed students to join the research speed date channel by a certain date, so they would get paired with a classmate. And this was its own activity, a prep activity about a week prior to the library workshop itself. And then I modified instructions for a face-to-face research speed date or a think, pair, share activity. And I added it to the first library workshop in the online English 102 course. And Canvas allows students to start a quiz, which is the format I'm using for this, even though it's not a test. It allows them to start that quiz, leave, and come back. So in that time, they can message their partner about when they want to have this conversation. And of course, there's this time element here. I don't want them starting the activity the night before and not realizing that they need to reach out to a classmate. So there's lots of warning involved. All right, so here's an abbreviated version of the instructions that students receive about how to contact each other, and they have about a week to do it. I asked that they use the phone or some sort of a chat app, whether it's GChat or the Slack Messenger, but I asked that they avoid texting or just emailing, so that it's an actual conversation. Okay, so after students return to the Canvas activity after their research speed date, I asked them a couple of questions about it. One is kind of basic. How did it go? How did you have your conversation? Those sorts of things. And then the other asked them about their research, what kind of ideas and feedback they got from their partner. And I've gotten mostly really positive feedback. You can read a few student quotes here. The bolding is mine, just to kind of make those really important parts jump out. So I was pleased with that student response. And so one of the things I love about this activity is that you don't actually need to be using Slack at all. Since I saw some success with this in English 102, I thought about how this pairing could work for research activities in other online classes. I actually tried it next, I think, with a 400 level seminar course that was not technically online, but students were working on their own over the summer to prepare their research topics. And then I tried it with some 300 level courses, and I saw similar student feedback there too. I actually kind of twitched a little bit when I saw this talking about going to Starbucks. I was like, oh, that was in the before times. Anyway, and the thing is, you can use these random pairing websites to pair up students. And I list the pairs within the activity instructions, and it's actually easier than requiring that everyone join a particular Slack channel. And when we were not using Slack, I pivoted to using the phrasing research conversation, since there's no real hashtag or channel being used. But then also without Slack, be aware that you don't have that built-in messaging function for students to reach out to each other. So spelling out other ways for them to get in touch is really important. So like most classroom activities, there's some potential pitfalls. Sometimes students just don't get in touch with each other. I make sure to let them know it's not their fault if they can't have their conversation with their assigned partner. I offer myself as a resource if they want someone to talk through their research with. And sometimes I'll see if we can kind of do a group of 3. Sometimes students are amenable to that. And then sometimes students note that they don't actually know anything about what their partner is researching. But even in those situations, I find that students usually come away with something useful or valuable from having had the conversation, even so. So I think the benefits generally outweigh these pitfalls. Okay, and so finally, why is this important? So online students often taking courses in this mode due to jobs or families. again, beforehand, before we went all online. I really think they deserve the same quality of instruction that students who are on campus are getting. They do so much of their work alone, and if they do interact with classmates, it's likely to be only through discussion board posts, which is not generally a great way to build rapport with a classmate. So by pairing students up early-ish in the quarter, I usually do this like week 3 or 4 for a quarter school, which is mine, they can make contact with a classmate, and then they do have the potential to reach out to them again in future weeks. And just a couple more student quotes here, with the bolding in mind, of course, showing that students really appreciate the ability to make connections with their classmates, and that they can see, oh, I'm as far along in the research process as you are, and now I have someone to check in with on this particular course. And let's see, so I did add this to Project Cora. I'm happy to send anyone the link or put it in the chat in a moment. And please reach out with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. So next we'll go ahead and move on to the question and answer portion, and Rachel's going to facilitate our questions. So if you think of anything comes to mind as we're having this discussion, please go ahead and enter those questions into the chat, and Rachel will make sure they get answered. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have a couple of questions in the chat that got answered in the chat, but I thought I would bring them out now. They were both for Drew and Sarah. One is, this is a great model. I love it. Who leads the work for change management? How do you initiate change and maintain policies moving forward? Anyone from the Pacific team?
So this is Laura speaking from Pacific University, and Drew and Sarah can add on to this answer if they like. But one of the things about the Cotter change management model is that anyone at any level can sort of start off the process. So that's handy. At our library in particular, we have a library steering team. So anyone within the library can sort of bring things to that team's attention. And then we also have a library faculty group who's involved in university governance. So that's another way that people can sort of start the change process for us. But again, I think because of what the steps are, potentially you could at any level in a library sort of start that process of building sort of a coalition to work on things and creating a sense of urgency and following through with the rest of the steps.
Great. And there was also a question wondering how long it took to update the faculty handbook hours-wise.
Right. And so since our model sort of distributed a lot of the work, I don't have an exact number, but we did have 11 meetings, which ran 1 to 2 hours. And then I think based on how much work I did, there was probably 4 to 10 hours of writing involved for each person who was actually editing text in that process. Because we did like a couple of revisions of the handbook during that process. And it wasn't a short document to begin with. So thanks for that question.
Thank you. A question for Chelsea. Was the Slack channel tricky to manage at all?
Good question. First, I'll kind of just say that this, again, I think I mentioned it briefly, but this was, the use of Slack in this class was required by the instructor. I don't think that I would ever, you know, say that as an embedded librarian who's not an instructor of record, that I would require students to use Slack. So I kind of had that going for me already, which was great. I did set up that research speed date channel within the Slack group for the course. And that's not tricky at all. The only sort of technical thing is figuring out how to add that donut app, as they call it in Slack, to that, which is the feature that does that auto pairing of students, and figuring out the timing of that. I'd say especially the timing, like knowing that they're gonna get paired on a Monday morning, and then that will allow them to do that activity that week. That's the trickiest part. And then from there on out, the students can then see each other. They're paired in the little messaging part, and they've been pretty much good to go. So yeah, having that established use of Slack, but that's why I talked about how there's other ways to do it without Slack.
Great.
Good question.
Yeah. Any other questions for any of our presenters? This is for Rowena. What's the faculty response been to Omeka?
Faculty response has been pretty good. We had a huge push in the spring to collect that year's scholarly output. A lot of people finish their PhDs or publish papers. So I think my goal is to maybe like every spring have sort of a campaign like, hey, what have you done this year? You want to share it with a repository. And we can also hold your preprints or whatever you're legally allowed to share with us. We'd love to hold that. So I think the faculty response has been pretty good. Of course, with the pandemic happening, you know, everyone's just scrambling. And so, you know, we'll see what happens in the coming years. This is a new project for us, and I hope to keep it going for as long as I'm here. So it's growing.
Great. Have you, Chelsea, tried the research speed date via Zoom breakout rooms?
Good question. Yeah, most of my instruction up to this point has been pretty fully asynchronous. So I think I've only taught in Zoom one time this past spring, so no. But I do have a Zoom teaching session coming up in early September, and I'm thinking about a way to try this in breakout rooms to pair students up into groups of 2 and have them have some conversation. I think it'll work well in that course. So stay tuned.
All right, well, we're coming up on time, but if people have any more questions, last questions, want to throw them in the chat, you can. I'm gonna get the Zoom links for the poster sessions and put them in the chat as well. And Anne can talk a little bit about how that's going to work.
All right, well, if folks don't have any other questions, we can start explaining how the poster sessions work. So let me share my screen. Sorry.
What is he doing?
Mads, you're distracting me, please. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna, from 11 to 11:45, we're gonna do the 3 poster sessions. The way that the breakdown is gonna go is that each poster session has its own Zoom room link. And so we encourage you to take the time, maybe about 10-15 minutes for each poster session. So you can it's kind of like choose your own adventure. You can start in any one of these 3 poster sessions and then feel free to hop around. Or if you want and you're really interested in the topic, feel free to stay longer than that. But we really expect people to be kind of coming in and out, and the poster sessions are like real poster sessions where it's not so much formal presentations, but kind of you're just kind of catching the conversation as it comes in, and then at a certain point it might restart again. So
did I have one of these this morning?
So the first poster session is Team Science, a question of support for undergraduate research. This is with Abby Coulter, she, her pronouns, a librarian at Western Washington University. Jenny Oleen, she, her pronouns, the scholarly communications librarian at Western Washington. And Wyatt Goebel, he, him pronouns, a student at Western Washington University. The second poster session is called Co-Create Your Class, Fostering Student Agency and Inquiry in Academic Libraries. This is going to be with Caitlin Maxwell, she, her pronouns, a librarian from Western Washington University, and Abby Coulter, she, her pronouns, a librarian at Western Washington University. And then the third presentation is called Libros for Oregon Collections Connect Communities. This is going to be with Hannah Bostrom, she, her pronouns, a librarian at Salem Public. Deborah Gitlitz, she, her pronouns, the community outreach librarian at Wilsonville Public Library. Valeria Davila, she, her pronouns, the diversity scholar at Oregon State University and Press. Alice Perez, she, her pronouns, the law library assistant at Multnomah Law Library. And Mark Peterson, he, him pronouns, the collection development librarian at Mount Hood Community College. So at this time, so Rachel emailed all the participants the links to these various Zoom rooms, but we're going to also throw them in the chat just to make it handy for you. But does anyone have any questions on how the poster sessions will be working?
And will this room stay open or is it going to close?
I'm going to see if I can be in 2 Zoom rooms at the same time. Technically, we have 4 accounts, so it may stay open.
And I was going to just pop into my poster session in another browser. And
oh, okay.
So
that answers your question, Chelsea. Yeah, this room will still be open if you have any remaining questions or anything like that. But each of the poster sessions, the facilitator will kind of close out the session around 11:45. So at this time, we're going to take about a 10-minute break and we'll regroup in the poster session rooms at 11 o'clock for the presenters. So thank you so much for joining the lightning talk of this portion, and we'll see you in the poster sessions. Thank you.
Oh, it's not going to let me do it in another browser.
That's fine. I'll just I'll stay on here for a couple more minutes before transferring off to
On my iPad, actually, I'll just do that.